Alright everybody, for today's video we're going to be discussing the idea of maintenance mechanics. Things that turn into busy work as you play a game, and are there methods to make this enjoyable? But before we do that, everyone here must do at least 50 push-ups, go take a run for 25 minutes, and I want a 50-page report about Metroidvania design on my desk. I'll wait. A maintenance mechanic for our topic today is going to be anything the player must do to remain or regain 100% efficiency while playing a title. And this is something that we have seen as kind of the intersection between game design and realism. And this has been shown in many different examples. Not a lot of them people like. Some of the more infamous takes are, of course, weapon durability in action titles. Everybody loved having their weapons break in Breath of the Wild, or having to return to the blacksmith and get your weapons repaired in Diablo 3. Any kind of survival mechanics, hunger, thirst, temperature, sanity, you name it. Things that have to be constantly maintained or you die. And ultimately, that's what kind of is the main point of maintenance mechanics. At their best, they're going to make the game more annoying to play or slow the player down. At their worst, the player just outright dies and they fail, they don't maintain it. And we had this discussion on the Game Wisdom Discord. Can you make maintenance mechanics or maintenance systems fun? Can you make them enjoyable? Because at the end of the day, they're like doing your taxes. And how do you make doing your taxes fun? I'm sure every adult watching this is probably wondering that question right now. And this is very tough to balance. And we've seen kind of two implementations of these systems. And we'll talk about one now, and then the back half of this video will focus on the other. But the first kind of solution is that you want to figure out ways to mitigate their impact or kind of use them as a form of progression. Because the problem with maintenance systems as a whole is that there is no choice, there is no thought process to how they work. If I'm playing a survival game and I must eat 8 points of food a day, then I'm going to need to eat 8 points of food a day or I'm going to lose. There's no min-maxing there. There's no greater strategic depth. I eat or I die. That's about it. And again, that's how real life works, as I'm sure all of you watching this are well aware of. But when we're playing a video games are again designed on abstracted rules and systems. Some games make you have to manage your exact calorie intake. Other games, you could eat 10 pieces of cake, 57 cheeseburgers, 48 pizzas, and as long as it's food going in, you're still going to be fine. And the problem is that when we see maintenance elements in a game, they're never used by the player by choice. In Subnautica, for instance, if you didn't have to manage your hunger and thirst, why would you need to build those respective machines or harvest those specific resources? There's no other reason for it. And with these games, they're oftentimes just used as a kind of speed bump for the player. Now again, I'm sure some of you are about to point out about survival games, and survival games are a very big point, that they are built on these kinds of limitations. If you try to play something like Rust or Long Dark or even Subnautica and you turn off all those elements, that turns off a major part about that game. And I don't know if the Long Dark ever did this, but Subnautica does allow you to play it in sandbox mode, removing those elements from play. Therein lies the problem. How do you make these systems enjoyable? And the solution can't be get rid of them. That's not how you fix things here. So, the first solution that we've seen some developers do is, like we've said, they introduce mitigation or the progression into these maintenance systems. So one easy example of this would be with weapon durability. The further you play the game, the stronger your weapons become. So at the start, you may have weapons breaking every few minutes. Later in, they may never break because they're just so damn good. In Breath of the Wild, they gave you the Master Sword at one point that has infinite durability. And that was an amazing time to pull that sword out of the stone there. But we can also see this in some idle games and survival titles. That when you start playing it, the basic ways or the basic options to deal with these maintenance mechanics takes the longest to do. You have to grow, very basic, very low level food, or your clothing isn't going to protect you all that much. But as you play through the game, you unlock the ability to craft better food or wear more protective clothing. So suddenly the things that were stopping you or slowing you down aren't as bad or may just be completely mitigated. Again, some titles will introduce far into their production chain or their progression the means of just permanently removing that maintenance from the equation. And that can often be a major carrot on the stick. But again, the problem with this kind of approach is that you are intentionally putting in elements that make your game more frustrating or cumbersome to play to then introduce the fix or the solution further in. And that doesn't really work for a lot of players. Again, for me, I hate maintenance elements and mechanics in my games. It's one of the reasons why I kind of bounce off of Don't Starve over there. And Don't Starve is another really interesting example of these kinds of maintenance mechanics. Because one of the issues that they did, and I remember I spoke to the developer about this in an interview, is that when you have maintenance elements in your game, it makes it very hard to reach a point of stability. As in when you don't have to worry about these issues anymore. And they did that intentionally because, the point of Don't Starve is that you're supposed to be surviving. If you can reach a point when you don't need to worry about food, temperature, or thirst, what else is there? And therein lies the problem with these kinds of games and when they implement these systems, is that oftentimes there's not another system or another gameplay loop to go with this title. So that if there is no reason to survive, then there's no reason to explore. And there's no reason to explore, then there's no reason to build. And you lose your entire progression curve when that happens. So, with that said, we're going to do our Patreon supporter and sponsor shout out now. And when we return, we're going to discuss the other option developers have had to introduce maintenance elements but without making them frustrating. And now for a quick shout out to our current Game Wisdom supporters and sponsors. Going forward, all Patreon supporters will get early access to our videos. And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, linked down below. If you're looking for more wisdom about game design, be sure to check out my latest offering of books, 20 Essential Games to Study, aimed for first-time developers and students looking for some inspiration for their upcoming games, and Game Design Deep Dive Platformers if you're interested in anything regarding 2D and 3D platforming design. They're both available in print, digital, and wherever books are being sold. For our second example, I really don't have strong footage to show, and I'm going to ask you guys if you can think of examples of what we're going to talk about here. But, as we said in the last part, the problem with maintenance mechanics and systems is that they are designed to be busy work. They are supposed to be limiters on the player's ability to enjoy the game. So, one of the things that we've seen some developers do is the ever popular adage of it's easier to catch flies with honey than it is vinegar, or whatever that adage is. And what that means is that instead of punishing the player for doing something, they're going to reward the player for doing it. And the only examples of this that I know of come from like MMO and RPG based games, where the game is balanced around, let's say, the player being at 0 in terms of their stats and efficiency. Or actually, let me change that. Let's say we stay perfectly at 100% efficiency. We will never drop below 100%. But how we present these elements is that you can do things that, in essence, will make you go above 100%. So let's say we're playing a game where you can eat food. Instead of requiring the player to eat food to maintain 100% effectiveness, we could say that by cooking and eating food, you will gain a 20% health point buff, 10% attack damage boost for 30 minutes after eating that food. So, the player is still being conditioned to make use of these maintenance systems, but the difference is that they are not being punished for not doing it. It is always seen as a net positive for participating in this. The reason why I have Grim Dawn on here is that it removed the need to repair weapons as a maintenance system, and they introduced the idea of salves and ointments that you can put on your weapons and gear to give you benefits for X amount of minutes. And again, the player in these kinds of implementations, they are never going to be considered worse if they don't make use of these systems. But again, with how things are scaled and how kind of the balance and interpretation is, they're going to feel like, oh, I do need to eat food every 30 minutes or whatever to maintain that buff. But again, the point is that they're not being actively punished. The game is not becoming harder or killing them because they didn't make use of these systems. And again, for those of you who have an eye or a mind towards design, it doesn't sound like we're really changing anything. Again, the players still need to eat. They still need to use items on their weapons and gear. But the interpretation of it and the implementation matters in this context. And like I said, if you present something as a reward, not as a punishment, the player is going to feel more inclined to do it. And they're not going to be as annoyed with you for making them do it. Because, in essence, they're not being forced to do it. There's no ticking timer that says, you must eat in 3 minutes or your character dies. But they see the benefits of it. And I believe, or I feel like that is a major difference with how maintenance systems work like this versus the basic version that we talked about in the first part of this video. Like I said, a maintenance mechanic by itself does not have any greater depth or complexity to it. It's something the player needs to do not because they want to do it, but because the game is forcing them to do it. With this kind of example that we're talking about, the player is not being forced. They're not losing anything for making use of these systems. They are gaining something in the process. And like I said, a major point about game design has to do with human psychology and making something that somebody wants to participate in. And if you can do that properly, you can keep somebody far more engaged with the title as opposed to pushing them away because they feel like they're being punished for playing the game. And that is what you want to avoid at all times. You don't want the player to feel like by playing this game, they are worse off than not playing this game. And like we said, with survival-based titles, this is a harder balance to achieve. You need to introduce ways to either mitigate the maintenance systems or outright remove them at a certain point of play. You can introduce a new production chain or a new challenge at that point, but the player shouldn't feel like they are repeating the same thing in hour 50 of the game that they were doing in hour 2. And I mean literally the exact same thing. Again, this is one of the issues I had with the early versions of Don't Starve. That no matter how far I progress up the tech tree, I still needed to harvest grass and rocks and whatever the other items were because they were still being used in the material process or in the refinement process. Another option is to introduce alternate solutions that could change or mix things up. So let's say, for instance, at some point, if we're dealing with hunger and thirst as a mechanic, we could introduce a new machine or a new food source that maybe it doesn't heal as much of both, but it does both, as opposed to most food and thirst items or liquid items only healing one or the other. We're changing how the player responds to these maintenance systems, and that can be, again, a form of progression. So, to begin to wrap things up, maintenance systems and mechanics are not very well treated by players. Again, it is the homework or the taxes that you have to do. Again, for the kids and the adults watching this, that you have to do to be able to play your game. And when you tell somebody that they can't do what they're enjoying because they have to do something else, they're not going to feel all that motivated to keep playing. So the best ways to offset this are to either introduce ways of mitigating this or changing what the player has to do. And again, as with this part, if you can turn a maintenance system into a reward, not a punishment, it will make things feel a lot better in the player's hands. That they want to do this not because they're being forced to, but because they see the active benefit. And again, one of the more famous examples of this is from World of Warcraft, and how they changed rest experience to not be a punishment for playing too long, but as a reward for logging off and accumulating kind of rest experience while you weren't playing the game. Somebody who wants to keep playing the game can continue to do so, and they'll earn 100% experience. But if you log off and come back, you could be earning, I think it was like 250% experience or something along those lines. So if you can think of other examples of this, let me know in the comments below. But thanks for watching this video. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And until next time, take care. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.